Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Thank God we're down to the wire here for this year of 2021. What's up, everyone? This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, here to bring you the Friday edition of our 2-episode weekly podcast here on YouTube and Rumble. Before we delve into the show, make sure you all subscribe, comment, and rate the show for me. We have a Monday and Friday show each week, where we discuss AEW Dynamite, Rampage, NWA Power, weekend events and pay-per-views, as well as our retro series content, which is exclusive to the Friday show. For those of you that are checking out the show for the first time, right now we are in the process of recapping NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. And as we transition into the new year, we will be discussing the 1986 era of WCW and the 1983 era of World Class. So if you enjoy retro content and you want to hear some historical show recaps, come back and check out the show each Friday for that. Today, we will be continuing along with our retro content, but we will also be taking a look at AEW Dynamite from December 29th, which was the final episode of Dynamite for 2021, and also the final episode of Dynamite on TNT before they switch over to their new home of TBS starting in 2022. And boy, do they go out with a whimper, but we will get into that. And like I said, we also have the final episode of WCW for 85 to recap on the show. But as per usual, we will begin the show with the rundown of Dynamite and get that show done the fuck over with as quick as possible. And we begin with probably the only good thing on the entire show, and that was the return of Jim Ross to the commentary booth. And it's also probably the only time I will ever hear an AEW commentator state the following phrase, "It's so-and-so night, and you know what that means," and not get pissed. But he's back, he's cancer-free, and by God was the spirit with JR on Wednesday night. And unfortunately for JR, they really didn't give him too much to work with for this edition of Dynamite, but by God, was that man going to try his damnedest to make the most out of this wretched program. Our opening match was not as exhilarating as JR's return to the booth. It was, stop me if you've heard this before, another fucking multi-man AEW tag match. And this glorious cluster of bodies included Jurassic Express, Christian Cage, and the Lucha Fucks taking on Matt Hardy's cast of Stooges, and God bless him, FTR were involved with this horse shit. In other words, it's a gotta get everyone a payday match. And if I had any desire to actually break down the details of the match, I could do so. But I think a more concise, yet still accurate way to put it would be something along the lines of the following statement. When FTR were working, the action was perfectly fine, and whenever they were not tagged in, well, the action pretty much sucked. I know this is going to piss off so many people, but I don't give a shit. I've watched professional wrestling for a little over 25 years by this point. I've seen some pretty bad tag teams in my lifetime. I don't think I've ever seen a more inept tag team where everything they do makes less and less sense the more I see them than when it comes to the Lucha Brothers. At this point, it's actually kind of comical. The day I see a Lucha Bros match where they don't manage to fuck something up, it'll probably be the first and last time I see it. They're so bad, dude. They're so bad. It's really noticeable watching them compete in multi-man matches. Like, at least when they're doing normal tag matches, there's less room for them to stumble and trip over everyone they're in the ring with. But when these guys are booked in 6-man and 8-man or, God forbid, 10-man tag matches, it's like watching a fish out of water. They're clumsily tripping over guys left and right. Everything they do looks so damn sloppy. Their timing is off for everything. It is honestly amazing to me that these guys don't end up killing themselves or the people they're involved with working in the match. They're so bad. Props to FTR for being able to work multiple matches with these clowns, because goddamn are they horrible. And of course, the Lucha Bros are only like 50% of the problem with this match. We had all kinds of great TNA moments in this match too, where the cameras missed like all the critical dives at the end, which was classic. I don't even need to mention the lack of tags by the time we got to the end with everything, and it just broke down entirely. At this point, I think it's probably like an unwritten rule in AEW tag matches where once you get like 2/3 of the way through the match, it's just, all hell breaks loose and fuck tag rules, which, I mean, for Christ's sake, if that's how AEW tag matches are going to operate, then just tell me that from the beginning of the match. I don't give a shit what the fucking rules are. Just explain them to me from the beginning so I understand all the bullshit I can anticipate toward the end and I don't have to get pissed about it. I can just go, okay, fine. AEW tag matches don't need tags after the 10-minute mark. Great. Perfect. I don't care. Just tell me what the fucking tag rules are. If there are even any tag rules. The only good thing I can note about this match is that FTR won. Although at this stage, I really don't even know what difference it makes. Oh, and speaking of TNA, here's another great TNA moment. The finish to this match was FTR getting a pin on Christian Cage, all to set up what, you might ask? The Lucha Bros versus the Jurassic Express for the tag titles next week. What? Sure. Why not? Who cares? And if one multi-man clustered illogical tag match wasn't enough for you, well, don't you worry. You got your fair share of them on this particular show. Up next, we had 2.0 and Daniel Garcia taking on Santana Ortiz and Eddie Kingston. Santana and Ortiz, who are teaming with Kingston because, well, why not? I guess as a reminder that PNP still are technically employed with the company. I will at least credit them in this match for attempting to run with some kind of story. It also helped that, for the most part, everyone followed some form of coherent tag rules here and actually got some genuine heat on the faces toward the middle portion. The finish saw the heels rolling up Ortiz and stealing the pin using the tights, which was the same finish they used in the Rampage match with Kingston. And apparently that is the story they are going to continue to run with the heels, where they get underhanded flash pins over the faces. Probably would have a little more weight to it if every fucking AEW match didn't end with underhanded chaotic flash pins, but what can you do? We also had the pointless babyface run-in from Jericho after the heels had already decked Santana with the ring bell and left him for dead, which was high comedy in and of itself. But what made it even better was that as the faces are all checking on Santana's health, all the while they've got Jericho's theme playing in the background, And the people are happily and merrily singing his theme while the babyface is left for dead in the ring. Just fucking incredible. And boy, I'll tell you, Chris Jericho, man, he really knows how to take the piss out of just about everything he's involved with on this show, doesn't he? Guess it's fine, though, because apparently Kingston is not seen as one of AEW's 4 pillars, so they must not be too concerned about riding whatever wave of momentum he may or may not have at this point post CM Punk. They really shit the bed with that one. Speaking of 4 pillars and ideal candidates for that role that continue to go unrecognized, Wardlow smashed Colin Delaney in a minute or so. That's pretty much it. Oh yeah, and they did another MJF promo beforehand where I guess they're doing some kind of ladder qualifying match for the TNT Championship or something. And I guess MJF wants Wardlow to qualify for it, but then if he wins it, he wants Wardlow to hand the belt over to MJF because contractual stipulations or something. It was very wacky. Had some more bad acting from the Beta Bucks and the Undisputed Era before the main event later on. And apparently Cole and O'Reilly still are not technically on the same page. Okay. Seriously, like, do the Bucks know how to just act like normal, average human beings? Are they really this goofy and cartoonish in real life? Cannot imagine these guys have an actual Christian upbringing. They're just so clowny and awkward. And if the Beta Bucks weren't enough when it came to bad acting and turn the channel heat, AEW had decided, you know what the show desperately needs going into 2022 to just fill the room with more energy? Brandy Rhodes. That'll get the people on their feet. And it also didn't help that they latched her into a skit with Dan Lambert this week. And of course, they're out there trying to badmouth Brandy, so what is Lambert's go-to line? He refers to Brandy Rhodes as a stripper. Because it is WCW Nitro in 1999 with Russo on the booking committee where every fucking woman on the show is a skank, whore, hoe, bitch, any derogatory term in the dictionary you could possibly contrive for women. And well, the entire blow-off was teasing the idea of Dan Lambert versus Brandy Rhodes, which I can only imagine the only person in the entire world that would actually want to see that is Brandy herself. And, oh my God, man, it's like, it is the same exact situation as I just ranted about with Chris Jericho. Everything Brandy's involved with on this show, it just sucks the life and drains the energy out of the room like you just wouldn't imagine. She's beyond Beta Bucks turn the channel heat. She's like, get the fuck out of the television business kind of heat. It's not even like what Lambert said about her wasn't true either. I guess possibly discounting the whole stripper thing, because, I mean, I don't know Brandy's backstory. I mean, maybe she was a stripper during her college years for all I know. It wouldn't surprise me with the way most young women are today, especially with OnlyFans and social media around. But, like, particularly when it comes to the wrestling aspect of things, I mean, we've all seen her. Brandy's fucking atrocious. She's a terrible wrestler. Her promos are usually awful. Her acting is horrific. She isn't over with the crowd. Nobody likes her on camera or wants to see her. There's literally no redeeming qualities about her at all when it comes to her as an on-screen persona. And like, I don't know. It's like by the time this was over, the only thing I could keep thinking to myself is, what in the fuck was the point of any of this? What is this setting up? Like, obviously they wouldn't be that stupid to actually book a Lambert-Brandy fight on TV. And AEW is pretty fucking stupid, but I mean, they should be able to apply a little bit of common sense here to realize how fucking ridiculous that would be. Unless your name is Awesome Kong, I don't buy that any female talent on the show would ever believably beat up any of the guys, plain and simple, even in this company. Maybe excluding Marco Stunt. And, like, I know they announced later on that Ethan Page is getting his TNT title shot against Cody next week, but really? That's your build to Page and Cody? Teasing a fist fight between Brandy and Lambert and laying out Dustin Rhodes like a dweeb? Great fucking build, guys. Almost as great as them building the Hangman Page Bryan Danielson title rematch for next week without announcing who the judges are. Tune in next week, I guess. And on the subject of untalented females that can't wrestle and no one gives a shit about, Jade Cargill wrestled Thunder Rosa in a TBS tournament match. I kid you not. The first 5 minutes of this match was Rosa and Cargill doing horrible brawling on the outside mat, and somehow, some way, the official had not already counted them out, despite the fact that I don't recall either girl ever breaking the count at any point. And of course, that was only the first part of this horrid match. I went to use the bathroom, came back, and Jade was getting the heat. I think the crowd fell asleep. Jade's selling is beyond abysmal. Thunder Rosa couldn't do jack shit with her in this match. Jade, she just has no idea what she's doing in there. She's basically the female Lex Luger, except she isn't over. There was actually a point in this match where she hoisted up Rosa onto her shoulders for one of those Canadian backbreaker deals. And not only did she almost lose her grip trying to hold up Rosa overhead, but when she dropped Rosa to the mat, she legitimately spiked her on the floor, and I thought she was dead. I honestly have no idea what AEW sees in Jade Cargill that I'm not seeing. It's like they are so desperate to have their own version of Bianca Belair that they'll just fast-track rush Jade Cargill in this monster push, despite the fact that it's clear and evident as the day is long that Jade is a horrible professional wrestler. And, I mean, maybe she'll get better in time, who really knows, but we are way too early into this thing to find out how long that's even going to be. Certainly, we're probably looking at a few more years before she's really polished and ready to be on television, much less get a fucking title push. Yep. Here we are, going into 2022, and they're trying to strap a rocket ship to her and push her to a main event level position that she's clearly not ready for. And the finish of the match was Sterling running interference on the outside. Rosa tried for the figure four, but got kicked into the ropes, and obviously someone missed a cue because Rosa ended up leaning outside the ring with her head in prone position for like 10 seconds waiting for that hooded chick to run in and do her spot. And, well, as it turns out, it's every horrible trope in the wrestling playbook where the masked hooded figure runs in disguise to do the angle, and they end up just revealing themselves 30 seconds after the fact, which of course defeats the whole purpose of the masked run-in, but there you go. And I like Mercedes Martinez too, so kind of sucks they botched your debut like that, but it wouldn't be the first time AEW botched a debut for somebody. But I'll say this, I just dedicated a chunk of my show from Monday talking about how terrible AEW's women's division is, and I mean, if I were trying to cut all the green dead weight on the roster right now, women's division would pretty much be boiled down to Thunder Rosa, Serena Deeb, Britt Baker, and maybe Ruby Riott right now. But if Mercedes is going to be sticking around long term, I'll take it. She's a real solid worker. She's been in the business for years now. She's got a great look. She knows what she's doing. And if they're going to pair her with Jade as a heater, it's probably the best thing they can do right now. At least it'll mask Jade's lack of ring ability if they do tag matches. So, comes with its shares of pros and cons. And as far as everything goes, match sucked. Wrong girl won. No one gave a fuck. But Mercedes is an added bonus to the female division, so you take what you can get. Wedged into the middle of the program, we had a fun little CM Punk promo who, again, proves to be one of the only true highlights of the show week in and week out, aside from Danielson. And, of course, he gives JR the nice welcome back, hoorah. Spent a minute or two putting over Brody Lee, who sounded like he was taking some shots at people who tried to belittle his work in the business or something. Not exactly sure he was referring to there. I mean, I know I just pointed out the fact that he's still on the active AEW roster page, which is just weird. Still not as dumb as having Brody Lee's son on the active roster, despite the fact that he's only like 8 or 9 years old and has no official training or ring experience. But main premise of his promo was that MJF obviously doesn't want to fight Punk because he's a coward. So Punk is going to turn his attention onto bigger and better things like the AEW World Championship. And if MJF decides that he wants to grow a pair of balls and face Punk in the future, he can do so once Punk has gold around his waist. Pretty basic little idea there, but I think what I liked about it is that he's taking a very clever approach in dismissing MJF in order to get under his skin. Like, obviously, we know the feud with him and MJF isn't over because, Punk has basically said from the onset, I'm not going to play MJF's games to boost his already overinflated ego. So, by Punk turning his attention away from MJF and trying to focus on other things at hand, the natural response from an ego-driven asshole like MJF would be to say something like, wait a minute, Punk thinks I'm a waste of time? He's not a bigger deal than me. That egotistical, arrogant prick. I'll show him. So, we will see how MJF fires back at that. Strewn throughout the show, we had a huge conglomeration of a bunch of rapid-fire video pre-tapes to set up upcoming TV matches. One of which I wrote down here included Anna Jay and Ty Conti wrestling the Bunny and Penelope Ford in a street fight, which should be phenomenally dreadful. We also had Brian Pillman Jr. doing a promo on Malachi Black, which was, well, I will say this. I like Pillman Jr. I like the Varsity Blondes. Pillman Jr. isn't exactly well-renowned for his promo ability. This was uncomfortably bad when it comes to acting, but did a fine job setting up the match between him and Malachi for next week, so whatever. Probably will also be the show where Brody King makes his debut as Black's muscle, because that is apparently what Black has been reduced to now on AEW programming. He's just another guy in the tag division. Great book in there. Although I guess I should at least credit them for the fact that it is more than what they are doing with Andrade at this point. Again, more pre-tapes I skipped over, more bad acting, more garbage nobody cares about. And that brings us to the Undisputed Era Best Friends 6-man main event. Because you gotta give the people what they want. More Orange Cassidy. Woot. Oh, here's something for the record book. Kyle O'Reilly's first lockup in AEW is with Chucklefuck Taylor. Beautiful. And I have already ranted about how ineffective this was going to be in using Kyle O'Reilly in his debut match in a 6-man on AEW TV, but, I mean, what more needs to be said about it than that? Did you actually expect Kyle to be efficiently showcased and spotlighted in this match in any way, shape, or form? If you did, pass me whatever weed you're smoking, man. I'd love to get a hit on that bong. This match was a fucking mess, which meant it was your standard AEW TV match. And of course, AEW tries to mask it by throwing in a bunch of WrestleMania false finishes toward the end just to keep the match going 5 minutes longer than it really needs to. It got sloppier and sloppier as it went along. There were about 4 or 5 times where guys took bumps and I thought they were dead upon impact. Although I will admit, the spot where Chuck Taylor stumbled out of the ring and fell off the rampway onto the floor, I did laugh at that. But there was a spot where Bobby Fish took a suicide dive through the ropes and smashed the back of his head against the wall outside, which looked brutal as fuck. Trent got dropped on his neck a couple times, which he sold at first. And, I mean, with modern wrestling now, you never know whether or not guys are actually selling because everyone does stupid shit all the time and everyone gets hurt anyway. Because no one knows how to actually work anymore in professional wrestling, so we end up actually dropping and stiffing people for real, which evidently leads to more injuries in the business. Who would have thunk it? And, of course, because it's a story involving the Bucks, you figured they were going to stick their fat noses in it by the end. We get the run-in from that fucking Nimrod Brandon Cutler, which no one gave a shit about. I have to point that out. And God, you could just hear the audible groan in the crowd when the Bucks came out and did that super kick spot to Taylor and Trent. And pretty much the takeaway lesson we learned by the end of it was that Kyle O'Reilly can't win a match in AEW without tons of interference and random chaotic bullshit going on. So by the aftermath of match 1, Kyle is already fucked in AEW. Not surprised, because unless your name is CM Punk or Bryan Danielson on the show, AEW never ceases to amaze in their sheer level of stupidity and inability to get anybody over effectively. And the drama of Cole's involvement with the Bucks and Red Dragon continues, which, well, because the Bucks are booking it and overseeing a lot of it, it probably will equate to more overly convoluted, contrived bullshit. And trust me, I've watched enough Bucks segments on the show for the last 2 years to know that whenever these guys get the book and they're writing their own storylines, you can pretty much expect loads of unfunny comedy and random illogical hodgepodge of bullshit week after week. So, buckle in and stay tuned for that. And I think, if anything, this episode of Dynamite really put into perspective just how meaningful the last part of my Monday's podcast was when it came to analyzing AEW's roster. Too many goddamn cooks in the kitchen on this show. It is another prime example of we got too many bodies to feature in 3 hours of weekly TV, so fuck it, let's just throw out as many people as we can onto the show and just do a bunch of meaningless, tumultuous, multi-man clustered tag matches. And, I mean, if AEW were running house shows and following this kind of booking formula, I could probably get behind it. But this is primetime television, and I can assure you that I really do not want to watch 2 hours of Crash TV horseshit every week. But that's pretty much what this program has become now. Hence why, aside from JR's return, the only other thing that I semi-enjoyed on the program was Punk's promo. And I am looking forward to Page versus Danielson next week, so the video package for that was good, even though I'm still wondering why they're holding off on announcing who the judges are for that match, but whatever. Like I said before, man, Punk, Danielson, the occasional sprinkling of MJF, they continue to be the only redeeming qualities of this entire show for me right now. FTR are good whenever they are not affiliated with all the other bullshit, and Kyle O'Reilly's debut was a total dud, and until the day comes where Cole completely disbands from the Bucks entirely, and the sole focus is just on Fish, Cole, and O'Reilly as a separate trio, I probably won't be able to get invested in anything they do as a unit for the time being. Another jumbled mess of a wrestling program with one or two upsides. Kind of sounds like WCW Nitro in its dying days, doesn't it? And it's also a good reflection on why we do these retro recaps, because God almighty, do I need a cleanser after talking about AEW every week. So let's get into NWA World Championship Wrestling from December 28th of the year 1985. And our first sight for the night was Nikita Koloff decking a job guy with a clothesline, resulting in a flip bump from the jobber. So within 10 seconds of the program, I already knew that the show was going to be marvelous. And our first promo of the night features the real man myth legend Dusty Rhodes, who I believe is the only man I have ever seen rock the denim on denim look. And he's also the only man I know that can comprise an entire 60-second promo on the idea of getting a haircut, and it is still the best promo of the night aside from Ric Flair. Sam Houston versus Tony Zayn was our opener, and I know I seem to have developed a reputation here in the Retro Review series where I continually find any excuse to tear down Tony Zayn, but my God, did that guy look like shit. He has that body type where you could poke and prod him with a styrofoam pool noodle. That guy would probably bruise like a banana. And aside from the sheer hilarity of everything that is watching Tony Zayn get his ass kicked, I wrote down pretty much nothing about the match. It is a Sam Houston match, which pretty much means aside from the Bulldog from Out of Nowhere, there really isn't much worth discussing. There you go. I haven't used that one in a while. Up next, we had Tully Blanchard at the booth without Baby Doll, which Tony and David made mention of later in the program. And again, if you remember the whole Baby Doll Tully alliance and split going into 86, you probably remember how quickly and how efficiently that whole thing came together. Almost out of nowhere, shall we say. All right, Jerry, that's enough out of you. But he was mostly out here to talk about Magnum TA and winning back the United States title, and taking a minute to plug the TV title tournament for next week's show. He also mentioned something about collecting the final prize for the Bunkhouse Stampede, which apparently was a thing that was still going on around this point. After the break, we get Jim Cornette at the booth with Tony to put over his boys, Beautiful Bobby and Loverboy Dennis. And he also made sure to call out Tony Schiavone for his god-awful tie he had on, which, coming from Corny and all the goofy suits he used to wear on TV every week, just a classic heel line there. And by the way, for those of you that did not see the show, I will fill you in with the details on Tony's tie. It was a standard red tie with a charcoal suit. You literally couldn't get any more white collar than what Tony was wearing on the show this week. So that led to the Midnight Express taking on the team of Mark Cooper and Josh Stroud. And of course, if you've seen any Midnight Express on the TBS Superstation around this point, you can pretty much sum it up the exact same way every time. Condrey and Eaton out-wrestle and outwork everybody they're paired with, and Cornette runs back and forth between ringside and the announce booth to be loud and obnoxious. 5 stars. There was one notable part of this match that I wrote down, and I mostly took note of it because of the way they filmed it. There's a part in this match where Condrey is holding one of the job guys on the outside, and Eaton goes up top to do this huge diving clothesline to him on the outside. And keep in mind, the outside stage floor is literal concrete with no padding, and Bobby Eaton is doing a diving clothesline from about 8 to 10 feet in the air onto this man on the outside. But with the way they filmed it on television, all you literally see is Bobby unceremoniously descending into earth on this poor job guy and landing with a giant thud on the concrete. It was as comical as watching an old Looney Tunes skit where Daffy Duck gets a giant anvil dropped on his head from like 100 feet in the air, except for the fact that I was actually concerned for Bobby's health upon landing. And of course, 5 seconds later, he's back on his feet sliding into the ring like nothing ever happened. And after that, we had Arn Anderson versus George South, where the extent of my notes on this match read as the following statement: Dat Gore Buster Doe. Literally all you need to know about that one. But then we get the first real highlight of the program, and that, of course, is Ric Flair in all his splendor, sporting the purple and white robe for the ladies this evening. And, of course, they are all going nuts for it, probably legitimately hoping that Flair would take each and every one of them back to his room and fuck them one by one. No shame. And, of course, on the night where he's defending his world title against a guy they're eventually trying to groom as a top babyface on this program in the next few years, Flair is full-fledged babyface hero mode on this show, and he's not even trying to hide it at this point. And if there was ever a truth so well spoken from the Nature Boy here, it was with the following line at the end where he goes, "I love being Ric Flair so much, I just might stick around for another 20 years. And boy, was he not kidding. Then we had Rocky King and Mac Jeffers, which was not quite on par with Ric Flair and his magnificence. And I may be entirely wrong here, but I could have sworn that I heard either Tony or David mention something about Rocky being trained by Jimmy Valiant, which I didn't even know was legal. Of course, what we also forget is that the only thing that ever made Jimmy Valiant great was his outgoing personality and not so much his ring skill. Rocky King is no Jimmy Valiant. Let's just put it that way. Again, not much to note about it, except for the following statement that I wrote down at the finish. Rocky King just won with a body slam. Hysterical. And if the previous match wasn't underwhelming enough for you, here's a nice piss break match for you. Blackheart and Jim Jeffers. It's actually funny here because of all the matches on the show where they'd actually go out of their way to try and implement a story of some sort, they decided to center the entirety of this match around the idea of Jeffers getting near falls on Black Bart. Yeah, think about that for a minute. Of the twin jobbers on this show, Mac Jeffers, he's a total dweeb. But by God, Jim Jeffers, he's out there getting offense and near falls and close calls on established name talent. Amazing. Side note, I did briefly jot this down. Jim Jeffers' babyface comeback. Atrocious. And Black Bart won with the dreaded leg drop of doom. We had more wackiness with Cornette and Schiavone. He teased giving Schiavone a necktie with tennis rackets on it, but right before he left, he changed his mind and went, actually, on second thought, Tony, kind of like that tie. And Tony proceeded to give the camera the Tony face. And if you don't know what that means, go back and watch classic NWA content. You will know what I'm talking about. But now we get to our first of two big featured matches on the program. It is Ole Anderson and Magnum TA for the United States Heavyweight Championship. And up until this point in reviewing this retro content, the majority of my Magnum TA notes read something to the effect of belly-to-belly suplex 1, 2, 3 after show beer. Not this week. Nope. This week, this was not a simple in-and-out procedure for Magnum. He and Ole went out this week, and they did some classic main event caliber pro wrestling. In fact, I actually jokingly wrote down here that they had a slobber knocker. But honestly, by the time it was over, it was not entirely inaccurate. Aside from the fact that they gave this a little over 20 minutes, including commercial breaks, pretty much 90% of it was both guys just going ham and slugging it out back and forth. It was a knockdown, drag-out street fight. They spent the first part doing some basic chain wrestling, but once we got around to the 15-minute mark, these guys cranked things up, and they turned this match into a goddamn boxing fight as we approached the 20-minute mark. We got Arn and Dusty out there in their designated corners to cheer their guys on. Of course, we fast forward to about the 20-minute point. Both guys are just fatigued and exhausted. Ole legitimately looked like he was on the verge of having a heart attack. And it eventually builds to the big moment where they reach the 20-minute mark. The bell rings for the time limit draw, but Jim Crockett is immediately out at the booth to announce that this match must have a winner. So they go to commercial break, give each guy a brief rest period before restarting the match. And there's actually a great moment right before they cut away where Arn gets into a shouting match with Dave and he goes, "What do you mean there's a restart? Who said?" And David Crockett just goes, "The man says." And Arn Anderson does the classic heel flip out where he just goes, "Dah!" Which was hilarious if you think about it for all of like 5 seconds. You're like, wait, Jim Crockett is giving Ole more time to win the United States title, and Arn and Ole are complaining and bitching about it. No. They're heels, so I guess I can at least buy the idea that they're supposed to be morons. You know, back when baby faces and heels were actually booked like faces and heels. And by the way, speaking of David Crockett, I do want to point this out. David was a fucking house of fire on the show this week. He has his moments where he can be monotonously boring, and believe you me, when David Crockett is bored on commentary, he does not shy away from expressing it. But when there's something exciting going on, that dude lights up like a Christmas tree. And the comeback from break, Magnum and Ole are hammering it out. We get to the big spot at the end where Arn trips up Magnum under the ropes. Dusty immediately springs into action and gives Arn probably the worst series of punches I think I've seen on camera. And of course it didn't help that they covered up for it horribly by showing a slow-mo replay of it where you could clearly see Dusty was not making contact. But Magnum manages to roll up Ole to retain. Everyone goes insane and pops for the finish. The heels are enraged by this grave miscarriage of justice, and all is right with the world. It was the polar opposite of everything AEW did with Cody Rhodes on Rampage by having him win the TNT Championship and sending the people home pissed off for a title switch that no one wanted to fucking see. But a great TV segment. And that was immediately followed up with Jim Crockett making the announcement that the fans get to pick a special series of Championship Challenge Series matches for the February 7th show. And unlike the WWE contrived version of Taboo Tuesday, where they pretend that the fans actually get to vote on already pre-selected matches, I think the fans' votes actually were taken into account with this one. That transitions into Ric Flair and Ron Garvin for the NWA World Heavyweight title. And I have been over this a couple times before, but from a very young age, watching Ronnie Garvin in the title picture, cannot say I was ever a big fan, but I cannot take away from the fact that come bell time, that dude worked his ass off. And of course, having Flair as a dance partner only raises the quality of the match tenfold, but this was another pretty great match. And it was every standard Flair match in terms of what you'd come to expect out of him by this point. Selling and bumping his ass off to make his opponent look good. Garvin had some of the best facial expressions in this match, too. There's actually a part where Flair was giving Garvin some of those clubbing blows over the ropes, and if you freeze the frame at the right point, Garvin's eyes are just totally bugged out of his head. Dude's gasping for air like he just got the wind knocked out of him. Great stuff. And match was going along relatively fine until, as my notes read here, Dusty Rhodes hits the ring for the blatant DQ for reasons unknown. So in other words, the classic Dusty finish. And if I'm not mistaken, I think 85 was the year they officially gave Dusty the book, so I guess I should not have been all that surprised with the fucked finish. And they do the big angle afterwards with all the faces and heels jumping in and doing the mass brawl. Heels attack Dusty's leg again and tried to put him on the shelf, but Magnum eventually ran them all off. And of course, 15 minutes later in the program, Dusty's back out doing a promo and is perfectly fine and not selling the leg. Whoops. So following two great old school main event level championship matches for the Superstation, minus the fucked finish of the Flair Garvin match, which I indeed wrote down sucked mask cock. They proceeded with the following match. The Italian Stallion versus, no joke here, not making this name up, Pablo Crenshaw. Talk about a standby match. Or perhaps it was a cleanser match for people to go drain the cow after probably having wet themselves with the Ole Magnum and Flair Garvin match. Regardless, Stallion won and not a single fuck was given. We follow that with J.J. Dillon at the booth, essentially promising a big surprise going into 86. And again, they've continued with giving Buddy Landel the Benoit treatment on the show. Although they did kind of allude to the fact that JJ spent 85 developing one diamond in the rough, but that he's ready to move on to bigger and better things. He also had a line in here about latching on to hula hoops and mood rings after they've already passed, to which I could literally hear the classic cartoon spring boing go off in my head. Like, what the fuck is he talking about here? But again, if you know your NWA history, you know exactly what JJ is referring to with big surprises, and boy did he not disappoint. We had Dusty, Magnum, and Ronnie back out to basically destroy the interview set and challenge Flair, Ole, and Arn to an old-fashioned butt-whooping. The handicap games are over, the sneak attacks are over, and now it's retribution time, daddy. And you know Dusty means business when he's out there no-selling injuries, man. Watch out, Flair and Anderson, brothers. You don't know it's coming. And closing match was Tully Blanchard and Kent Glover. Tully, who I guess was not all that concerned about three pissed-off babyfaces threatening to destroy and dismantle Tully's friends. No, goddammit, Tully's got to wrestle Kent Glover on this show, and that is where his focus is on this evening. Dusty, Magnum, and Ronnie threatening to kill his best friends. It's going to have to wait. The only thing that matters right now is me getting this defining singles win over Kent Glover. And the only thing of note I wrote down here was David leaving the booth after hearing about some shenanigans occurring in the locker room. Because as we know after watching this program, if there's one man that is capable of breaking up a fistfight between 6 pissed-off main event level wrestlers, it is David Crockett, bro. And that is our big cliffhanger we are left with going into the new year. Lots of nice little teasers going into 86, following 2 phenomenal TV matches in the same night. What more could you ask for on this retro show? Aside from Paul Jones and the Barbarian getting some promo time. At least we got Jim Cornette this week. But for sure, you've got to check the show out if you have the Peacock subscription. Or better yet, I know a lot of classic content is on YouTube right now. Just go watch this in full if you have an hour and a half to kill. You have to at least go out of your way to watch the Magnum, Ole, and Flair Ronnie matches. Excellent stuff from those guys. And as I noted before, that concludes NWA World Championship Wrestling from 1985, which turned out to be a decent year for them, but we transition into 86 in the coming weeks, and that was a particularly noteworthy year for Jim Crockett Promotions. And for the sake of not spoiling things, I won't get into details now, but from a personal historical perspective, it's also around the time frame where I started getting introduced to wrestling and started consuming the product with my brother on a more consistent basis. So the year 1986 has a very special place in my heart as a young fan growing up. So this will definitely be the year where we reflect on some of the material with modern eyes to see how it holds up in 2022 and find out whether or not 1986 was truly as great as I remember it being. And normally this would be the point where I transition over to World Class Championship Wrestling, but as I previously mentioned with the Flair Kerry cage match review from last week, the last 2 shows on the Peacock library for World Class in 1982 are actually just Christmas Star Wars highlights shows. One of them I know focuses on the six-man with the Freebirds and David Von Erich, and the next episode focuses on the Flair-Carey cage match. So there isn't actually any new content to discuss in the final week of 82. So for next week's show, I will be jumping right into the beginning of World Class for the year 83, which is actually supposed to be the January 8th show, but for some reason, that episode is not currently on the Peacock library. So I think I'm going to have to find that one on YouTube. But we will continue our retro review series for the new year, and we'll also be continuing reviews on AEW Dynamite for the Friday programming. So same exact format for the coming year. As always, make sure you guys subscribe, comment, and rate the show. We'll be back on Monday for the rundown of AEW Rampage and NWA Power. And instead of the usual Chairshot article analysis, we will be taking a look at WWE's Day 1 show, which is scheduled for Saturday, January 1st. And I haven't exactly decided how I want to go about that show. For sure, I'm going to be talking about the Lesnar-Reigns match for the Universal title, which is the only reason I am watching that show. As far as the rest of everything goes, we're going to wait and see how things pan out. If I find the show is worth discussing in full, I will do an entire report of the show from top to bottom. If everything else on the show sucks mass cock, I will just focus on reviewing the Lesnar-Reigns match. So, stay posted for that. I will check back with you all for the Monday show, and it will be the beginning of a new year for the FSWR channel. Until then, Happy New Year to y'all. Take care.